Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some seriously fascinating source material. We're looking at why ancient financial, spiritual, and communal systems all use the exact same number, 10, as a structural blueprint for human flourishing. We're going to see how the text frames this ancient architecture. And honestly, it might just completely change the way you look at your own life. So the source kicks things off with a super relatable question. Why does your life feel, fractional? I mean, think about it. We're constantly tracking our metrics, optimizing our morning routines, chasing KPIs, looking at portfolio returns, and yet we still hit a wall. We're left wondering why our day-to-day reality feels so incomplete. It's like something essential is just perpetually missing, you know? Well, the text argues that the answer is hiding in a single number, 10. And once you see how these ancient systems were built entirely around this specific digit, you'll realize it is absolutely not a coincidence. It's not some mystical superstition either. According to the source, the number 10 operates as a structural fingerprint. It's literally a diagnostic tool for complete health that pops up in the most unexpected places. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the blueprint of reality, or what the text actually calls the factory settings. If we look at the very first chapter of Genesis, the phrase God said appears exactly 10 times to build the world. And the Hebrew word used here is devar, which is incredibly fascinating because it means both word and substance. The source points out that when God speaks those 10 times, he isn't just making sounds. He is literally building matter. It's 10 utterances to create a world where absolutely nothing essential is missing. That is your baseline standard of completeness. And this standard scales up beautifully into how we're actually meant to live. Take the 10 Commandments, which, by the way, the original Hebrew calls the 10 words. They serve as a complete architectural cross for human flourishing. You've got 4 vertical commands that map out your relationship with the source, and 6 horizontal commands for your relationship with your community. It's not just a random list of rules, it's a structural blueprint for wholeness. Here's where the source offers a really sharp diagnostic. It argues that most of us today are desperately trying to optimize those horizontal 6. We want better relationships, peak productivity, a flawless workplace culture, but we do it without addressing the foundational vertical 4. And if you try to build your life that way, the text warns that you are building on a cracked foundation. You could have a perfect interior, but with a compromised base, you aren't thriving. You're literally just counting down to collapse. So, how does this apply to our resources? Let's move to section 2. Breaking the ownership inversion and financial protection. The text points out a really interesting historical moment. Long before any formal religious tax was ever a thing, Abraham voluntarily gave a maser. That's a Hebrew word rooted literally in the word tenth. He gave this to Melchizedek, and the author stresses that this was a sovereign, deliberate act. It wasn't a mandatory tax, it was a choice. Now, the source frames giving up this 10% not as a loss, but as a protection wall. By deliberately releasing the 10th, you are publicly declaring that the other 90% doesn't own you. Releasing it doesn't shrink your pie, it actively protects your stewardship over the rest of it. And what it's protecting you from is what the source calls the ownership inversion. This is that slow, super sneaky process where your assets stop being tools you use and start becoming masters that dictate your life. The tithe acts as a protective fence. It breaks that inversion, keeping your wealth exactly where it belongs, safely under your management instead of ruling over you. Okay, let's shift gears to section 3, the minimum community threshold, also known as the Sodom floor. The source brings up the story of Abraham negotiating the fate of Sodom, which was a famously chaotic city, and Abraham basically haggles like he's at an ancient flea market. He keeps lowering the required number of righteous people needed to spare the city. He goes from 50 to 40 to 30 to 20, but the absolute floor of that negotiation, the bare minimum, was 10. This ties perfectly into the profound Jewish concept of a minyan. A minyan establishes that 10 is the quorum. It's the absolute minimum threshold of adults required before communal prayer can even begin. The text explains that you don't have a community of 1 or 5. 10 is the specific structural number where collective spiritual reality and protection actually become possible. And this is a massive lesson for whatever environment you're in today. You don't need the vast majority of people to be completely healthy to save a culture. You just need your 10. If you have 10 people operating with genuine, rock-solid integrity, they literally act as a threshold of protection to shield the rest of the organization. Now, what happens when things get tough? let's look at Section 4, 10 Days of Vindication, and the Daniel Protocol. Think about the historical figure of Daniel. He was a captive in Babylon, and the empire wanted to completely erase and reshape his identity. But instead of rioting or just throwing his hands up and quitting, Daniel asked for a 10-day test. It was a finite, carefully measured duration of sustained faithfulness under extreme, intense pressure. And at the end of those 10 days, the results were undeniable. The king evaluated them, and Daniel was found to be 10 times better than every single expert in the entire Babylonian Empire. The source makes a great point here. In seasons of intense testing, you don't always need to spark a massive revolution. Sometimes you just need to stay faithful to your core identity for your 10 days and let the completeness of the outcomes speak for itself. Which brings us to our final and honestly most personal warning. Section 5, the fractional response, or the warning of the 9. The source highlights this incredibly powerful story where Jesus completely healed 10 lepers. Nothing was held back. All 10 were fully 100% restored. But here's the catch. While the provision was complete, the response was fractional. 9 of them just kept walking. Only 1 out of the 10 actually turned back in gratitude. And that leaves us with this echoing, heavy question. Where are the 9? The text argues that this perfectly illustrates a fundamental tension in human nature. God, or the ultimate system of reality, operates at a 10. But we almost never respond at a 10. And the source warns that this kind of ingratitude doesn't just make you look bad. It literally leaves a structural gap in your capacity to receive whatever comes next. The single person who returned didn't just get to say thank you. He was the only one who received a second word of blessing. The major takeaway here? Completeness requires a complete response. To truly step into complete flourishing, you have to fully acknowledge the whole gift you've been given. So ultimately, the rule of 10 acts as a diagnostic mirror for our lives. We have to ask ourselves, is your vertical foundation solid before you build your horizontal one? Is your wealth a tool serving you, or is it a master owning you? Do you have that minimum threshold of 10 for integrity in your community? Can you survive a 10-day pressure test without compromising? And finally, is your gratitude whole, or is it just fractional? Based on the ancient architecture we've unpacked today, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to really sit with. If 10 is the standard for a reality where absolutely nothing is missing, in which of those 5 areas are you still living at a 9?